Hello everyone and welcome to the last check-in for the Glorious Dawn live quilt-along. This check-in we're going to talk a little bit about machine quilting, which is great because that's what I love. But even if you haven't started the quilt-along yet, it's not too late to join in. You can still get the kit for 50% off. So just use the promo code Glorious Dawn. In the description box there's a link that takes you to it. So definitely not too late to get this bundle of goodness. The kit, coordinating thread collection if you'd like, lots of fun. So anyway, I'm Angela Walters, to answer questions that you might have about the quilt-along or about quilting in general. And we've had a great couple weeks. We went from the beginning of the quilt. We've talked about things like how to quilt it, the blocks that we're using, tips for piecing, and probably some unrelated stuff along the way. But is it really ever unrelated if it's quilting? I think not. There were a few questions I couldn't get to from last week, so I'm going to address those right now, and then I'm going to open it up to the questions that are on the live video that you're watching. If I skip your question, don't worry, I'll try to get to it, and at the end I'll kind of scroll through and answer it on the group when I'm done talking. So lots of fun. Let me see what we had come up last week that I wanted to address. Okay, still some people having trouble finding their class. So what you're going to do is you're going to sign into your account on myblueprint.com, and the class or the quilt-along will be under the class tab. It's different than the craftsy.com. So even though you still have all your classes at craftsy.com, this one is hosted on Blueprint. So you want to make sure you're logging in over there with your information, and then you can find it. So be sure to check that out because other people are asking questions. This is a great resource to have if you have questions or to help out other quilters. I love how quilters are so generous with their time, and so you can help them out as well. Now, Karen had asked a question last week about her quilt top. She said that her row of flying geese was longer than the center and just wanted to know if there were any pattern corrections. And the pattern, there has been no pattern corrections. It looks like the pattern is correct. We're not going to call it user error. We're going to say it's a glitch in the matrix. So sorry, Karen, I'm not sure what the problem is, but it doesn't look to be the pattern. So hopefully you've got that figured out. All right, lots of people logging in. Lots of people logging in from different places. I love seeing all the different locations like Texas and Michigan and Tennessee and Germany, all these fun places that I can't go, but I could be there, with you in spirit. So lots of fun. I saw one thing on here from Lynn, which I really liked. She said, I just wanted to say that I enjoyed this quilt-along a lot more than the Good Life quilt-along. This one was great. I had a lot of fun on the Good Life quilt-along, but the one thing that was missing was you. Doing this live check-in allows me to check in with you. It kind of gives us more of the along in the quilt-along live, right? So I'm glad you found it helpful. I sure have enjoyed it. Maybe we'll see this format in the future. I don't know. Lots of fun. Diane from Denver says, this quilt has been a joy to piece. Thanks for all your tips and tricks. Can't wait to see suggestions on quilting designs. Well, if I'm being honest, I could not wait to get to this lesson, either when we were filming the videos or even in this live, because I love talking about the quilting. You've put all this work into your beautiful quilt, then what do you do with it? So we'll definitely be kind of going over that in the few minutes we have today. And then from Montana and Iowa and Georgia, very, very fun. Okay, let's go back to the questions that we had. Tracy had a great question. She said, what do you do when you're quilting around applique of your quilts? Okay, so we're going to talk more about picking designs in just a second, but when I'm quilting around applique, the first thing I am thinking is, do I want to show this off? And usually I do. If someone else has done some beautiful needle turn, hand done applique, I know that's something that I'm not ever going to do. I really want to show that off. So I'm going to use echoing. Now, echoing is your best quilting friend. It helps separate that design from the filler. So by echoing around that applique, I'm just kind of creating this parentheses or this arrow kind of saying, hey, in case you're wondering where to look at this round little berry that's about a ½ inch that somebody took the time to sew in. So definitely a lot of echoing. Beyond that, the filler that I'm going to put around it is going to be inspired by the applique itself. So if it's a tree with berries, then I'm going to do some echoing and I'm going to add some leaves. So it really kind of depends on, what the quilt is. I will say though that in the background quilting, I'm going to make sure that the thread color matches because I don't want that quilting to overwhelm the quilt top. I mean, I really want that beautiful applique to be the star. Now, sometimes I come across quilts that aren't appliqued as well. Okay, well, if I'm being honest, they're just mine. I don't love to applique, so I do the fuse it on style of applique. where you just iron it on. And in that case, I treat it just like any other pieced block. I'll fill inside of it, I'll, quilt along the edges, all that kind of stuff. So what I do to the applique really just depends on the type of applique and the theme behind the quilt. But really, most of picking your quilting designs all comes down to that same exact thing. So hopefully that you found that helpful. Okay, Catherine, speaking of machine quilting, kind of on that same vein, she said, what's the easiest quilting pattern for a beginner on a sewing machine? All right. So when it comes to quilting designs, there's not any that are necessarily more difficult. There's just some that have more steps. Now, I like to think of quilting designs kind of like how we learn how to write our letters, right? We learned how to make it, and then we wrote it over again, and then finally we developed our handwriting. Some letters are very simple, right? Like the O or the I, and some have a little bit more steps to it. So really the best quilting design to start with is something that A, you want to learn how to quilt, and B, if it's something that you already doodle in real life. So I feel that people that draw or sketch or just doodle tend to have an easier start with machine quilting because they can already visualize the path. So if you happen to doodle leaves on everything when you're on the phone, then start with a leaf design. Okay, that being said, if you're like, I'm not a doodler, I don't know what to do, what I would suggest is using your walking foot to create some straight line quilting on your quilt. You can do some horizontal, you can do some diagonal, you can do some really cool stuff. But I want you to leave a good inch and a half in between your straight lines so that you can come back, put on your free motion quilting foot, and just try a wiggly line, just a nice wavy line. I think everybody can quilt a wavy line. I like to joke, if you don't think you can quilt a wavy line, just try quilting a straight one. Chances are it'll turn out wavy. So you're gonna do what feels comfortable and add a little pop of free motion quilting. So you can try either one of those ideas and hopefully you'll find that helpful. So very good. What? I have a video. Uh-oh, I hope everybody can hear me okay. Oh, good. So when I talk about echoing, thank you. Angela, you have an amazing name, Angela Young. I promise that wasn't me logging in asking. She said, what is echoing, Angela? I should have specified that. In the question that I answered about quilting around applique, I was talking about echoing. Echoing is just quilting the same shape, a space outside of it. So if I have a circle, I'm going to quilt another circle a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch away from the outside. So it's basically creating that same shape like you would see ripples in water or echoes coming out. I was trying to see if I have any, I don't really have any on this quilt to show you. So echoing is just quilting that same shape, and it's just going to kind of highlight it. So good question. Thank you. Thank you for asking that. All right, Teresa says, when sandwiching a quilt, do I use spray or pins? Neither. How's that for a good answer? No, when you're stabilizing your quilt sandwich, the most important thing to do is what you feel comfortable with, right? So if you like to use pins, go for it. If you like to use a spray base, awesome. I prefer fusible batting. So it's batting that already has that fusible on it. So I'm going to iron it to help hold those layers together. The reason I like fusible batting isn't very, complex. It's just unique to me. First of all, I don't like pins because I don't like to have to stop and take them out. Although I will say they're kind of good speed bumps to keep you from just going. And then also with the spray-based, overspray can be kind of an issue, and I don't really have a good spot to lay out my quilt and spray on it. So I just use the fusible batting. Now, when it comes to fusible batting, there are a couple different options out there. There's some that have fusible on both sides. It's fine. I like Quilter's Dream Poly. It has fusible on one side, and I have that sticky side up to the top. So usually the next question is, well, what about the backing? Well, the backing kind of adheres through the static electricity that, batting kind of creates with the fabric. If I was worried about maybe a big section or I felt like it was starting to slip, I would just, kind of smooth it down again or throw a few pins in there. But that's pretty much how I go about basting it. But ultimately, it's whatever you feel comfortable doing, whatever you like. And if you're not sure what you like, pick one, try it out. And if you're like, this is fine, then stay there. But if you pick it and you're like, I don't know, I think I'll try something else, try something else. That's what's great about it. You can experiment and definitely find what it is that you prefer. Great question. Maggie says that her Supreme slider arrived today. I love a Supreme slider for machine quilting. There's nothing, I cannot quilt without it. I went from hand quilting to long arming, and then came back and taught myself how to quilt on a sewing machine. Now, when I learned how to quilt, it was from my husband's grandpa. He was a hand quilter, and he kind of coerced my husband into buying me a long arm machine. And it's funny because I think, man, it's crazy. We never quilted on a sewing machine because we didn't know that you could, which is awesome. I think if my husband had known that I could quilt on my sewing machine, I may not have got a long arm. But I did get a long arm, loved it, and then had to go back and teach myself how to quilt on this sewing machine. And I just love the Supreme slider because it just, takes away a little bit of that gravity. It kind of helps it move smoothly. And I feel like since quilting on a sewing machine is like my second language, I can use all the help that I can get. I know some people like silicone spray. That's fun too. Or if you can find a Teflon sheet. So any kind of non-stick kind of surface will work. So those are the things I love. Okay, Lisa, what batting do you recommend for your quilting to really show? 2 layers? Types? Ooh, batting. I could talk about batting forever. It's kind of a boring subject unless you're, a super fan of it like I am. So to get your quilting to show, the best thing you can do is use a slightly contrasting thread, right? So if you're using like a gray quilt, like maybe just a lighter gray, just a slightly different contrast. But if you want the definition, right, you want that little puff or that loft in between, then you can experiment with different types of batting. When I'm quilting with Tula or making, quilting Tula Pink's quilts, we use 2 layers of the Quilter Stream poly. It's nice and flat. It really gives it beautiful definition. When she holds it up at a show or at a lecture, you can just see the beautiful quilting. It hangs nice and flat. But they're very heavy. They're very, very heavy. So it's not something I would suggest to put in a bed quilt or something that you're going to lay under, because you might have to have somebody come rescue you from your quilt every morning. If you want that definition without the weight of it, you could try like a puff or a batting with a higher loft. So wool has a nice puff if you get the right kind, or also Quilter's Dream makes a puff batting. So it's a little bit puffier, but you can experiment also with 2 layers of different types of battings. So if you're not sure, what you could do is make a couple samples, try quilting it out and see which one fits your preferences or what you are going for the look of it. And I think I talked about last week, when you want that quilt to be cuddly, we don't want to use 2 layers. We want to use a natural fiber like cotton to get it that nice, cuddly drape. So I know that didn't really help you out because it's a lot of different options when it comes to your quilts, but there's a lot of fun experimentation you can do with the batting, and they're all going to create slightly different looks. As long as you go with a high quality batting, you're going to be good to go. So Nicole says, my 4-year-old granddaughter loves watching you with me. Every time you say Echo, she gets excited because you know her name. We love you in Bonnie Lake, Washington. Aww. Well, Echo is my favorite quilting friend, right? That's so fun. I love that. Okay, let's see. Another question from last time. What do I think about bottom line thread? Do I always use 50 weight from Laurel? That's a good question. So we just went over batting options, and if you think there's a lot of batting options, there are even more thread options. So Bottom Line is a brand of thread. It's a 60 weight poly, so it's nice and thin, and a lot of long armers, or I would say a lot of long armers, love to use it in their bobbin because it's so thin it just disappears into the quilt. When I started machine quilting, I had the darndest time with it. It wasn't its fault or even my machine's fault, it was my fault. I was new to quilting and the tension was something I was trying to work through, but I just couldn't get it to work. So I went to the 50 weight thread. Hallelujah, it worked, so I didn't move on from there for many, many years. So if you had asked me this question even a year ago, I would have said, oh, I only use 50 weight. I love it because it's thin enough to blend, but it's low lint, and I still love 50 weight. That's my first love. So Superior So Fine or the Pima, Craftsy Pima cotton at 50 weight is such a good weight of thread to use. But recently I've been kind of experimenting with pre-wound bobbins, and I've been using lately a lot of pre-wounds that are 60 weight. It's not Bottom Line, but it is 60 weight poly. It's Magna Glides from Filtech. Glide thread is another type of thread, you might have heard it called. So I love that 60 weight because it just blends into the back, and when I'm quilting, it's not even about the color, it's really just about the ease of having them pre-wound. So I think 60 weight in the bobbin is a great option. Ultimately though, I'm just using whatever color I have that I need. And so sometimes that means I'll work 50 or 60 or maybe I have a random weight of thread around, I don't even know where I got. Then I might be using that as well. So really, Laurel, it just depends on what I've got. Okay. That was a great question about the bottom line thread, and I don't want to go into too much talking about thread because then I'll get this excited look on my face and then my eyes will glaze over and you all will click off of here because you'll get tired of hearing me talk about it. Let's talk about the piecing real quick and then we'll kind of come back to the quilting and talk about how to pick out designs. Tanya asked last week, and I didn't get a chance to get to it, is sewing one thread width outside the drawn line really that important? Now remember, we did a lot of stitching and flipping, and the pattern says to draw your line, and then normally I would say just sew on the line, but she says sew one thread width away from your drawn line. So the question is that really necessary? Probably. I didn't necessarily do it, so I don't know if I should tell you the right way or the way I do it. I think that has to do with the thickness of the pen that you're using. So if you're like me and you can't find your Frixon or your marking pen, I'll just get out my Sharpie or my ballpoint pen because I know it's just going to be on the back. If you have that thicker line, then you probably want to kind of draw or sew on this just to the side of that drawn line. But ultimately, I don't think it matters too much as long as you're staying as much towards the center, you know, sewing it in that line as much as possible. So hopefully that helps you out, Tanya. I'm sure some people will pop in with their suggestions on that. Be kind of fun. Okay, so let's talk about, I think that's all my questions. And I see some coming in here, and so we will go over those in a second. But let's talk about you, hopefully, if you're quilting along, you've got your X blocks finished. A lot of stitching, a lot of flipping, but the block is so cute, so it's worth it, right? Well, maybe you're like still having, you know, painful memories of all the stitching and flipping, but just remember, when it's all done, you'll forget the pain of making them. Once you finish your quilt top though, you can do your happy dance and then know, yay, it's time for the quilting. And depending on if you're more like me, it's, yay, it's time for the quilting, or it might be, yay, it's time for the quilting. Here's the thing, you can't enjoy your beautiful Glorious Dawn quilt until it's quilted. And think about when it's quilted, how you'll be cuddling up under it, and you'll be thinking, oh my gosh, I remember that funny thing Angela said, and you'll chuckle to yourself. Okay, well maybe that's not exactly the memory you have, but that's the memory I'll have when I'm sitting with my quilt. So what I want to talk to you about is about picking designs, because that's the #1 question I'm asked when I travel. And usually it's a drawing or a quilt block or sometimes a whole quilt, and they'll say, how should I quilt this? And I always give the same answer. I ponder a moment, I look it over, I act like I'm thinking something artistic, and then I say, it depends. I'm sure you can imagine how that goes over, right? It depends. It does depend because there are a lot of great ways to quilt your quilt. So if there's nothing else you remember from this chat or the whole Quilt-Along live, is that there's no wrong way to quilt it. If you like it, then that's fantastic. And even if you don't like it, you still have a finished quilt when you're done. It's like a win-win. But whether you're quilting it yourself or quilting by check, by taking it to your local long-arming quilter, there's some things I want you to consider. So when you're looking at your whole top, think to yourself, what's my favorite thing about this quilt? Is it that all your points actually match? Which for me, that would be a huge win because that's what you'll want to show off. And once you think about what it is that you want to show off, or what your favorite thing is, then you can use the quilting to highlight that. If your favorite thing about it is that it's just finally freaking finished, then maybe we'll do a quicker all over design. Or maybe it's the color of fabric. You love one color more than the other. Once you can start kind of zooming in on what that important thing is, then you can start picking out designs that are going to help you highlight it. So in the last lesson of the Quilt-Along, if you haven't jumped ahead and read it or watched it, I talked a little bit about that. But I'm going to show you the quilt here and just kind of give you some different things I could have done depending on if something was more important than the other. So let me get that camera for you to see. So here's my Glorious Dawn Quilt-Along quilt, and here's the very center. Now, if I'm unsure what the most important thing is, I'm looking at everything, nothing really stands out. then I'm gonna always kind of default to highlighting the center. That's because that's where our eyes tend to look normally. So since this was my favorite part, especially since you got a rainbow of all the colors right in here, I used a contrasting thread just in the center just to show it off. Now, it's like a pinkish color. It's like this color or in between. And the reason is, I'm not a huge pink fan, but for some reason these colors were just resonating, just making me happy at that point. So I picked designs, use the same thread color over here. And depending on your monitor, it might look orange, but it's actually a beautiful watermelon pink. So using the quilting in this area to kind of, in a different thread color, is really gonna draw attention to it and help show it off. Now, if I had said, oh, you know what my favorite things are? It's the fact that my points match, which I mean, come on, I'm kind of proud of that. I'm picking designs that go right to those points. That's really building up the thread in those areas and really kind of drawing the eye to that area. Now, if that wasn't my favorite part, right? If my piecing wasn't great, that is not the design I would have picked. And I definitely wouldn't have picked that contrasting thread to draw attention to it. Instead, if let's say the piecing wasn't as great, especially in the center, that means I'm going to do something more complex in the corners or in the borders or a different block, whatever that is. So first thing, thinking about what it is you want to show off and then highlighting it. Then try to pick designs that are versatile enough to be used in a lot of different ways. Now, if you wanted to, you could just do an overall design over the whole quilt. I think that would look fantastic. But I like to do a little bit more custom quilting because, I mean, you know, that's my favorite part. That's the whole reason I piece a quilt, is so I can quilt it. So I'm going to do different kind of designs in different areas. So going back to our quilt, you know, having my blocks here, and then I have my background, but I'm not trying to do a different design in every single block. There's a lot of blocks in this quilt. It's a sampler. And if I have to start thinking of something for this block and then something different for this block, it's going to lead to some decision fatigue. So this dot to dot technique, or this where we're touching some points and not touching the other, is something that I use a lot throughout the quilt. So whether it's here in the center, it's over here, use it in some other blocks as well, like our X blocks, or even in the border corner over here. So I'm picking these designs that can be used in a lot of different ways. So dot to dot techniques are definitely one that works, but also continuous curve. This continuous curve, where we're going from point to point to point, is so versatile because it can be used in so many different ways. And so I don't have to kind of come up with a brand new design. I just have to think about how to adapt it to the block that I'm working on. So here, just going to the four corners, this one is moving, kind of making a flower shape. This one is slightly different. Same thing kind of over here. So I'm trying to pick designs that are going to be able to be used in a lot of different areas just to make that, you know, easier on myself, which, I mean, I love quilting. I just don't want everything to be so difficult. I want to do something complex in one or two of the areas and then move on to something easier. Also, when quilting your sampler quilts or your Glorious Dawn quilt, another thing that will help you is if you can determine a background to your quilt. Now, looking at this quilt, it's pretty easy. It's the gray fabric. I've decided that's the background. That's all getting quilted pretty much the same way. And what I used was a swirl meander. I think I used some wishbones in a couple places as well. If you can say this is going to be the background, that wipes out about 50% of your quilt. You've already got that figured out. So even if you're doing a sampler quilt with a lot of different backgrounds, if you determined all this part will be the background, and I'm going to quilt it all the same way, that's going to help it all just kind of meld together and let those blocks shine. So I know that's kind of a quick overview of how to pick out designs for your quilt. But if you can look at it as I want to use them to show off or hide what it is I love or don't love, it'll make it a lot easier to pick out the quilting designs on your quilts. So let's see if there's any questions about that. Karen Fuller, oh my gosh, best questions. Any tips on how to rip out more easily? Well, if it comes to that point, you have to rip it out, right? We talked about this last week. Sometimes you got to unquilt. And if you're a knitter or a crocheter or a long arm quilter, you probably heard it. You know, we call it frogging because you rip it, rip it, rip it. When you're taking out quilting, the thing I love to do, and you have to be very careful, and I'm going to see if I can explain this without any props. I like to do what's called scalping. So I'll turn the quilt over, and then I'll have the backing on the top. So my quilt top is down under the batting, hopefully protected, and I'm going to start peeling back that backing and using my rotary cutter or my Tula Pink surgical blade. I'm going to start cutting it away. So I don't know if you can see, it's going to start just kind of cutting away that thread, and the backing will come up, and I'll just keep going. But you have to be so careful, because that rotary cutter blade can really hurt yourself or your quilt. So just take your time, and as you scalp it or cut it, it will peel back. Now that's also why I like to do it with the top laying down, because if I'm going to make a mistake and cut into something, I'd rather it be the quilt backing and not the quilt top. So that's kind of how I do it. You can try it some different ways. Okay, Diane says she's watched several tutorials on Craftsy on how to quilt. She wanted to try the feathers beforehand, and after several pictures that ended up on her kids' drawing table. LOL. So drawing is very important when you're practicing a design, and it's not drawing just so your hands know where it goes. It's drawing so that your mind knows the next step. Anybody that comes into my quilt shop and wants to try it a long arm, I always tell them, try quilting your name, because you already know the path of your name, and so drawing is a great help with that. So I know there are some good comments, a little bit of, we'll do one more question because this is a good one. Kelly, when quilting, do you do one pattern, or do you look at it and do different on each square? It depends. So if I have a square or a block where I don't want to show up as much, I'll just do an all over. But if I want to show off the individual pieces of it, then I'll do something different in those individual pieces. So for example, in the star, the center where I have all these different colors, I still quilted the block. I quilted it like a block. I didn't highlight each different fabric color differently. I quilted the block all as one. So it really depends on what it is you're trying to achieve with the quilting. And the thing is, the more you quilt, the more you'll learn what you like and what you don't like. So I can definitely give you my opinion, because I am the expert of my opinion, but you have to try it out and see what you prefer and what you like the look of. So I know there's a lot of questions on there. I'm going to come back after I stop the live chat, maybe try to answer some in the comment section. So be looking for that. And I know it's our last Quilt-Along live chat check-in, but don't worry, you can still go to the class and answer questions and ask questions on there. So please check that out. Definitely a great resource. It's where our Quilt-Along can still be along, just not live. And who knows, I might log in there from time to time to see how y'all are doing. But if you have an urgent question and you just can't figure it out, always feel comfortable or feel free to contact Blueprints customer service. They're fantastic, and they'll answer any questions that you have, whether it's about the fabric, the pattern, or even if you just want to show them a happy dance. Tell them, yay, I got it finished. Anyway, so hopefully I'll see you over on the Blueprint classroom, enjoying that, and enjoy your beautiful quilts. Have fun quilting it. And thanks so much for spending these last few weeks with me on the Glorious Dawn Live Quilt-Along. I'll see you soon.